Democrats on Capitol Hill trying to figure out how to move ahead when it comes to passing the new social safety net framework. A vote on the infrastructure bill delayed again amid party divisions. Florida is suing the Biden administration over the vaccine mandate for federal contractors. Governor Ron DeSantis says the mandate is not only unconstitutional, but it also deprives people of their livelihoods. And a New York judge refused to pause the state's vaccine mandate, denying a police union's request for a temporary restraining order. This comes as first responders and frontline workers express frustration over going from heroes to zeros in the public eye. Tune into Deep Dive as we explore these topics and more. Hello and welcome. This is Deep Dive and I'm Tiffany Meier. President Biden is now in Rome, Italy. Back home in the States, Democrats are scrambling as Biden's domestic agenda hangs in the balance.
There are too many members for the bill to pass, too many no votes for the bill to pass today.
Amid resistance from progressives, House Democrat leaders once again pushing back a vote on the Senate-passed infrastructure bill. Biden visited lawmakers Thursday morning, pleading for an agreement and vote on the infrastructure deal after he unveiled a draft of his scaled-back $1.75 trillion social spending and climate package.
No one got everything they wanted, including me. But that's what compromise is.
Progressive leaders assuring the president, even with some of the cuts from the social safety net plan, it won't be much longer before a deal on the sweeping spending bill comes together. And the House Thursday night instead passing a second temporary extension of the Highway Trust Fund, keeping nearly 4,000 federal employees on the job through December 3rd. That is the same day the government funding extension is also set to expire. Both the House and Senate are recessed until Monday. Now, staying in D.C., a court judge issued a minute order temporarily barring the Biden administration from firing civilian and active duty employees while they await religious exemption results. The judge went on to ask the administration to agree that active duty military plaintiffs whose religious exemption requests have been denied will not be disciplined or separated during the pendency of their appeals. On top of that, the judge is also calling on defendants in the Biden administration to file a supplemental notice by noon on Friday. That's to indicate whether they will agree that no plaintiff will be disciplined or terminated pending the court's ruling. Otherwise, it'll lead to another briefing. This comes the same day Florida sued the Biden administration over the vaccine mandate for federal contractors. Florida officials filed a lawsuit in a U.S. district court in Florida against President Biden, NASA, and several officials involved in federal procurement. Florida is also seeking a preliminary injunction against the mandate for contractors.
In the state of Florida, you have a right to earn a living, and it should not be denied to you based on these shots. And so we want to protect people who are working now in the state of Florida. These people have been working the whole doggone time, and then now all of a sudden they're going to get kicked to the curb.
President Biden's vaccine mandate requires all federal contractors to be vaccinated by December 8th. NASA and other agencies often contract with Florida, so the governor says this mandate will impact his state a lot. DeSantis points out such vaccine mandates are going to make people lose their jobs and disrupt the economy.
Do you think this is going to help the supply chain problems that we see?
The governor also says the Florida legislature will have a special session soon. They plan to focus on bills to protect workers from vaccine mandates. While DeSantis is taking action against vaccine mandates in Florida, over in New York, protests broke out Thursday as the FDNY firefighters led a massive march over the city's mandates. Starting Friday, all city workers are mandated to receive the shot. Earlier this week on Wednesday, a New York judge refused to pause the mandate, denying a police union's request for a temporary restraining order. And a federal panel hearing expressed skepticism over a similar case from city healthcare workers. 17 healthcare workers, many who are Catholic, said they cannot consent to the vaccines because they are tested, developed, or produced with fetal cell lines derived from procured abortions. But a New York judge noted the rubella vaccine, which is also created from fetal cell lines, that has faced no similar objections. One attorney for the health workers argued that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits employment discrimination based on religion, compelled the state to offer a reasonable religious accommodation so that nurses and doctors can continue doing their jobs. The judges weren't convinced. One judge asked, "What do you see in Title VII that suggests that Congress intended Title VII to preempt the state's exercise of its power to protect the health and safety of the people of its state?" While another judge said religious people often can't do certain things because of their religion. Somebody from Agudath Israel, the synagogue, cannot become a lifeguard at Jones Beach because he can't work on Saturday, adding that's just the way it is. Amid the current landscape, many first responders and frontline nurses are noting that at the beginning of the pandemic, they were treated as heroes, and now they are, quote, zeros. And now, speaking of frontline nurses, we sat down with Nicole Siratek, an ICU-trained nurse who traveled to New York from Nevada last year to help out when the state was the country's virus epicenter. She touches on the impact the pandemic and changing narratives had on the frontline workers, especially their mental health. Hello, Nicole. Thank you so much for joining us today. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
So you were one of the frontline nurses who came to New York last year and when New York was the epicenter of the pandemic. And so as one of the frontline nurses, how did you see the pandemic as having kind of an impact on frontline nurses, especially maybe in the mental health area?
Well, we saw a lot of camaraderie, but we also saw a lot of breaking points. I remember when we were just there and there were just people dying faster than we can even triage the bodies out of the bed, dead body out, living body in. I remember walking out into the hallway and there was one nurse just like completely just sobbing uncontrollably because she had been there. She was one of the staff nurses and been there from the beginning and had not had a day off, and I don't even know how long. And she's just like, I can't do this anymore. I saw a medical resident just put her head down on the counter and scream, I swear, for like 5 minutes, just screamed. And then she stopped screaming, picked her head up, wiped her tears away, and went back to rounding on her patients. I saw people who were literally just sleeping, sitting upright in the hallway in front of their patients' rooms. I mean, there were nurses that had come from all over the country and had left abruptly their home lives and what was going on there. There was, breastfeeding nurses that were still pumping, while on the unit and trying to freeze milk and send it back home to their newborn. There were, parents that were missing holidays and christenings and baptisms and birthdays and things like that. And we just had to keep pulling it together as we're just watching these people die faster than anything we had ever seen before. So it was definitely challenging and took a toll on everyone's mental health.
I think some have also brought up how there was so much uncertainty with this illness. It was a very new disease that people didn't know how to treat. There was the sheer numbers that you mentioned of patients coming in and dying, and then also the mortality rate, how even young people were dying. But how did you see that as playing out? Some healthcare workers were afraid to even go home because they didn't know if they would infect their loved ones. So what was it like being in that kind of a setting?
Well, it was kind of interesting because the longer that I was there in New York and I was on those units, the more my actual perception of what was going on changed, because I was at home like everyone else, sheltering in place. And I was watching the news just completely captivated about what they said was going on. And then I end up thrown into New York City in the epicenter. And after the first 48 hours, the first 2 shifts, I'm like, I don't think this is COVID anymore. Because they didn't even want nurses going into the room. So sometimes you'd only go in there 2 or 3 times in a 12-hour shift. We'd find patients that were dead. There were the wrong types of nurses and doctors that were there. I was taking orders from gynecologists and podiatrists and optometrists. And I mean, yes, they're doctors, but that's not the type of doctor that typically manages infectious disease or respiratory illnesses, and especially ventilators. I worked with school nurses and OR nurses and NICU nurses, none of which had manned an actual ventilator before. And so there were a lot of people who had good intention that wanted to come and help their country and help the people of New York, but many of them didn't have the skill set. So, I just saw chaos and a lack of appropriate preparedness and training that really led to the sheer amount of deaths that I saw, because I never saw anyone actually die of COVID. I saw a lot of negligence and malpractice and people who didn't have a grasp on what critical care was.
And so last year, especially, in the beginning stages of the pandemic, around like 7 p.m., the public would be cheering for all the healthcare workers, and all the frontline people, either first responders or, nurses, were really celebrated as heroes. But as time has passed on, it seems like now a lot of them feel like they're zeroed out or silenced. So how do you see that as playing out? What's your take on that?
I see that in 2020 we were essential, and in 2021 we were expendable. And that's not just nurses, that's doctors, that's EMS, that's firefighters, anyone in healthcare, probably anyone in general in employment now because of the vaccine mandate. But I mean, you're not in a true pandemic if you can afford to fire your nurses because they're not vaccinated. And most nurses, if you ask them, they get a flu shot every year. They get regular vaccines. They don't feel comfortable with this, and they should respect that. I mean, they've worked almost 2 years in a pandemic with a deadly virus, and most of us have natural immunity. I mean, I know for a fact, going to all the epicenters I've gone to, I've gotten it 6 times. It's actually dangerous for me to actually get the vaccine at this point. So it's just so disappointing to see that they put patients over profit, and they would put pharmaceuticals as the primary lifesaver, when in actuality, it's diligent nursing care that really saves lives. So it's just very disappointing to see that they would just disbase the nursing profession that way.
Well, Nicole, thank you so much for joining us today. Great to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate the time.
And now, before we end, Halloween came early for animals at a Belgium zoo. The Antwerp Zoo released this footage on Friday after caretakers offered pumpkins to several zoo residents there. Caretakers at the zoo first packed carved jack-o'-lanterns with treats, like hay and vegetables, then brought the surprises out to the animals' enclosures. Many of them wasted no time in claiming the holiday snack, with lions seen lazily munching and their cubs curiously joining in. The buffaloes took another approach, playing with their food and smashing it into bite-sized pieces. Other animals like hippos, tapirs, and chimpanzees all embraced the seasonal spirit. Located at the heart of the port city of Antwerp, the zoo is the oldest animal park in Belgium and dates back to 1843. It houses around 5,000 animals and 950 different species. But what do you think? Let me know below. Thanks for tuning in to Deep Dive. I'm Tiffany Meier, and have a wonderful weekend.